Hey everyone, welcome to day 6 of our week of praying for revival. And we're trusting the Lord to really minister to us and move among us and to revive us. So today we're thinking about mountain moving faith. We're going to read from Matthew 17, verses 14 to 20. So let me read that to you. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son," he said. "He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him." "You unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied. "How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "Because you have so little faith. Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Let's look at our devotion then. Jesus had just experienced possibly the highest point of his ministry. His glory had become obvious, and his Father had expressed his deep love for him and his deep pleasure in him. Then he came down the mountain to this, back to reality. His disciples were struggling over an exorcism that had gone wrong. They just couldn't manage to budge an evil spirit in the suffering boy. There were 3 types of faith that Jesus described in his response here. First, there was unbelief in verse 17. This didn't apply to the Father because he was desperate for help, nor did it apply to the disciples. They had some faith. So Jesus must have been referring to the crowd that had gathered. And by this point in his ministry, there were a lot of critics of Jesus. Some were religious leaders who were just jealous of him. Others were ordinary people who were dissatisfied with where Jesus was taking things. And to Jesus, the crowd was typical of this generation of Jews. They completely lacked faith in him. These unbelievers were pleased with the disciples' lack of spiritual authority. It confirmed their theories about Jesus. The crowd was probably critiquing and heckling the disciples as they desperately tried to help the boy. Despite all the evidence of Jesus' authority, all they had seen and heard, they remained unbelievers. It was so frustrating for Jesus. What more could he do? Second, there was what we call little faith, the little faith of the disciples in verse 20. We've already come across this term in Jesus' description of Peter's faith in chapter 14. It wasn't little in terms of its size because Peter walked on water. That takes huge faith, big faith. It was little because of its inconsistency. And this is how Jesus described the disciples' problem. So little faith. Jesus had previously sent them on a mission to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease. And they'd been successful. Certainly looked like that. So the disciples were experienced exorcists and experienced healers, but this time they just didn't believe. Maybe it was the critical crowd. Maybe it was a really tough demon. Maybe they were too tired, exhausted. Maybe they weren't praying, but their faith wavered, whatever the reason. They doubted. Perhaps we've all been there. So confident of Jesus' power to work one moment and you're plagued by doubts and past disappointments in the very next. That's little faith. Third, there was a tiny faith in verse 20. A mustard seed about 1 millimeter in diameter was a tiny seed. That's the size of the faith the disciples needed to move a mountain. I wouldn't get too carried away about moving mountains. Jesus didn't literally do that, and as far as we know, no one ever has. Moving mountains just represents a complete impossibility. So according to Jesus, the size of your faith doesn't matter. That's a huge relief. What matters is whether it's placed in the authority of Jesus and doesn't waver from that. That's it. That's the way the impossible becomes reality. Small but steady faith in the authority and power of Jesus. The size of your faith becomes immaterial. It's the unswerving focus on Jesus that counts. So with all of that, let's move into praying for revival for ourselves. Let's pray that I will have a vigorous and secure hope in God's promises and God's future for my life, what he wants to do with me and through me. For our church, that God will work in power among us through the preaching of the word and the prayers of the church, that we'll be a people who will continue in prayer, will not relax, but will really continue in prayer, and that the word will touch our souls, our lives, and continue to transform us. For national revival, that the Spirit will bring unity and peace to our nation, that will really be one, that criticism and division and arrogance will be overwhelmed by the grace of Jesus Christ, and we'll know our unity together as we live in Australia for his glory. So be blessed as you continue to pray, be blessed as you continue to minister, and trust that you will have that mountain moving faith. Thanks for listening.